Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf mem. We're going to get started with the Mishna at the bottom of Lamed Tet Amud Bet. Hashochet l'shem harim, l'shem gvaot, l'shem yamim, l'shem neharot, l'shem idbarot, shechita psula. So if you slaughter in the name, you slaughter this for the sake of a mountain, a hill, water, a body of water, a stream, okay, something that is attached to the ground. You might remember, we had a whole discussion about in Avodah Zarah that you can't turn a mountain into Avodah Zarah. Something attached to the ground can't become an idol. But here you slaughtered something to this item that's attached to the ground, which, right, you're not really turning into an idol. However, the Mishna rules in any case your shechita is disqualified because you basically slaughtered it for the sake of idol worship. Even if it's not actually an idol, it can't really be an idol, but it's enough to say your shechita is forbidden. Shnayim ochazim b'sakim v'shochatim, echad l'shem echad mikol elu, ve'echad l'shem davar kasher. What if you have two people holding the knife, one person holding the top, one person holding the bottom of the back of the knife? They're both slaughtering at the same time. One has in mind that it's for Avodah Zarah, for one of these for one of these things we mentioned, and the other has it in mind, just regular, I'm just slaughtering an animal for its own sake. Shechita psula. The one who has in mind for idol worship actually ruins the shechita. Now, even though it's not clear from the Mishnah, but the Gemara assumes that when it says psula, and this is the first words of the Gemara, psula in zivchei meitim lo. Okay, zivchei meitim we made mention of yesterday. Zivchei meitim is that pasuk in Tehillim which talks about Baal Peor, when talks about the situation that happened in Sefer Bamidbar when they after the whole Balak Bilam story, and then they got the Jews to worship idols. So they mention, right, there's a mention of it in Tehillim, and it calls them zivchei meitim, which teaches us that things that are used for idol worship are forbidden to benefit from. However, they assume from our Mishnah, because the Mishnah just said the shechita is disqualified, but it didn't say, and it's forbidden to benefit from them, from the shechita, that they assume this is not forbidden to benefit from. Okay, and I'm assuming that the reason, and not that I'm assuming, but part of the reason here, we're going to make this distinction, but part of the reason is going to be because the actual item that they said we're slaughtering it for the sake of this idol is not really an idol. That's what we said. Mountains can't really be idols, and neither can the water. It can't actually turn into, right? What would happen if we turn the yam into an idol worship? No one would be able to benefit from it, right? It's not effective. But still, your shechita is going to be disqualified. And that's why it's this in-between where it's disqualified, your shechita, but it's not actually, right, the meat you can go sell, for example. You can't, there's no prohibition to get benefit from it. Now, it's a little bit tricky. I mean, this is what I was thinking, then I went back and I looked it up a little bit. The previous Mishnah also, Rabbi Eliezer said it's the shechita is pasul. Now, we didn't exactly say it in those words. Now, the last Mishnah, okay, let's just remind ourselves, it said, Ashochet lo kochavim, if you slaughter for the sake of a Gentile, who's an idol worshiper, the shechita is fine, because we don't assume every shechita they do is for the sake of an idol. But Rabbi Eliezer posel, similar language, right? He disqualifies it. Now, there we said, if according to Rabbi Eliezer, now everyone else disagreed with him, but according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you slaughter it, we learned that it's actually, if I slaughter it for an idol worshiper who must have had intent for an idol, it's actually forbidden to benefit from. And he uses the language of posel. So the commentaries say the reason he used the language of posel, and we didn't infer from there, was his posel was just compared to the rabbi's kshera. The rabbi said it's kshera, and he said posel, right? He was posel. He disagreed with them. But there we assumed it was hana'ah. Here, because all we have is just shechita psula, and if they wanted to say it was asur b'ana, they would have said, and you can't benefit. Okay, but it's a little bit of a weakness, because we didn't derive that in the last Mishnah. But that's the assumption that they're going to make. And then they say, Urim minhi, and this contradicts the following source, which is a Tosefta. Hashochet l'shum harim, l'shum gavaot, okay, it sounds exactly the same as our Mishnah. L'shum naharot, okay, some people even have l'shum yamim, okay, like on ours. L'shum idbarot, right, I didn't translate this before, but it's sake of a desert. L'shum chama'u levana, now we start getting new cases, but those are all the same as ours. Now we have the sun and the moon. L'shum kochavim u'mazalot, for the stars and the constellations. Lishum Michael Hasar Gadol. I'm slaughtering this for the sake of the angel Michael. Or Lishum Shul Katan, which is some worm that people worshipped. Hare Elu zivchei meitim. Now here you have it. This says it explicitly, this is zivchei meitim. That's kind of the language they expected the Mishnah to say, and maybe the reason why they specifically assumed that when it says shechita psula, it doesn't mean that is because they compared the language to the Tosefta. When the Tosefta, when they want to say it's zivchei meitim, which means you can't benefit. So our Mishnah used the language of psula, which meant you can benefit, and now we have a complete contradiction to this Tosefta. Why does the Tosefta say it's completely disqualified to the extent that the meat now becomes forbidden to benefit? And in the Mishnah, it doesn't say that at all. To which the Gemara is going to answer, or Abaye is going to come answer, Amar Abaye lo kashya, hada amar lahal, hada amar gadda dehal. Our Mishnah was talking about you said to the mountain, and that's what I mentioned before, and Rashi quotes it here, as it says in the Pasuk, Elohim al-harim, they're gods that are on the mountains, v'lo ha'arim Elohim, right? When you get to the land, and you have to get rid of all the idols that they prayed, the Pasuk says, right? They're gods that were on the mountains, not the mountains themselves. Okay, that's the drasha, that it's not the mountains don't become avodah zarah. So our Mishnah was talking about the mountain itself. Okay, what's gadda dehal? The gadda is a deity. Okay, so or an angel, like not the angel of the mountain. Okay, the person who's in charge of the mountain. If you say to the person in charge of the mountain, then you're going to basically be creating an idol out of that, right? The meat now, your meat that you slaughtered, is going to be forbidden to benefit because it wasn't the item itself, it was someone who's in charge of that, and that's basically worshiping an idol, because you're worshiping, you're creating this, it doesn't exist really, but there's some person in charge of, person, angel, something, guardian, who's in charge of the mountain, in charge of the desert, in charge of all that. And that's what the Tosefta is talking about. Now, daikanami, dekatani, we're going to further prove this from the language in the Tosefta. Dekatani, because it says it there in the list, dumia di Michael Saragadol. Notice who's in that Mishnah, in the Tosefta. If you say it to the mountain, to all those, and then it mentions also to Michael Hasaragadol, who is an angel. So it must be that they're like that, which means it's some sort of deity, some sort of person, guardian that is in charge of the mountains, in charge of the hills, etc., but not the mountain itself. Okay, Shema Mina. And therefore you can infer that must be what it's talking about. And for that we resolved the first problem. Now we're going to bring something Rav Huna says. And this opens a whole fascinating sugya about what is my ability, and this is the topic of Din and Daf, obviously, for this week, because it's a fascinating topic. Am I allowed to forbid something of someone else's? Okay. Now, we learned in general, Ein Adam Oser Davar She'eno Shelo. I can't come into your house, take an item of yours, we learned this in Avodah Zarah, and bow down to it, and say this is an idol, because it's yours. Okay, so normally if I bow down to something that's mine, as if it's an idol, what happens? The item becomes forbidden to benefit because it's now an idol, right? I turned it into an idol, which means no one can benefit from it. But I can't go into your house and do that and forbid your item because what right do I have to take your stuff? It's not mine. So my connection to that item is not, I can't turn it into an idol. It's not mine. And this comes up, and Alana Steinhan in her shir this week talks about a bunch of different cases about someone forbidding something in different ways. Like she starts off with pouring milk into meat. Can I forbid your item? Of course I can. I mean, if I throw milk into your Chullin and I throw enough of it in, right? I obviously forbid it because there's milk in your meat, right? So it's not true that I can't actually forbid everything of yours. And the question is, where do we draw the line? It's a very interesting topic. So comes Rav Huna, and he says something very seemingly strange, which is Hayta behemat chavero revutza lifnei avodah zarah. Okay, so if a friend's animal is crouched down in front of an idol, kevan sheshachat bas siman echad asara. As soon as I start the shechita and I do half a shechita, I can already forbid that animal. Now, what he seems to be saying, we're going to say this right now, so let me just continue. Savrala ki hada amar Ulla, he holds like what Ulla said, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Even though we say that if I go bow down to your item, I don't forbid it, as I mentioned just before. But if I do an action to it, and presumably what we mean here is any small action, because slaughtering one siman of an animal is only half an act. So any little action I do to it, now you might remember this, we learned this in Nezikin, when we learned about property, that if I steal your property, to a certain extent, right, if I do something to it, it becomes mine. Okay, now it doesn't really become mine, it doesn't mean I don't have to return it. But it means that I have to, let's say something happens to it, and it gets ruined, like normally if I steal something, right, I would have to return it as is right now. But once it becomes mine and I acquire it, because I did something to it, then I have to return its value as it was at the time of the theft. So there's a certain act, and this is always a bit of a strange concept, that I can take something of yours, do an action to it, and that makes it enough mine that I can actually forbid it. Okay, so even though I can't actually forbid something that's yours, I actually can to a certain extent. And Rav Huna has a very low threshold of what I have to do in order for me to be able to forbid it. So all I have to do is start slaughtering it, and it already becomes mine. Okay, mine to the extent, not completely mine, but mine to the extent that my action of slaughtering it for the sake of an idol will turn it into an item that's now going to be forbidden for benefit. So that's Rav Huna's opinion. At the end of the daf, we're going to get to someone who says, no, you can't do that. Okay, there's going to be a machloket. But first we're going to deal with this opinion. So this opinion is Rav Huna's, explained according to also the way Ulla says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Now, so again, the idea here being, now, why the animal was revutza before avodah zarah, why those points are important, it's unclear exactly. It seems that, first of all, the way people normally slaughtered animals for idols was they did it in front of the idol, and that's why it's in front of the idol. Why crouch down? Maybe they want to say that there was less activity involved on the I'm not making this up, the commentaries say this. There's less activity involved on the person who's slaughtering. That's what they're trying to minimize, how much activity the person did with this other animal, right? How much ma'aseh there was. Very little, because the animal was already crouched. All the person did was come over and slaughter half a siman, right? If the animal was standing and they had to put the animal down, like that's even more activity. But we want to minimize it, and that's why the animal probably was revutza. Okay. So those are minor points for the sake. I just wanted to address them because it did seem like he had all these details, and why are the details there? So I'm giving you an answer as to why. Now we're going to bring a big difficulty. Eitave Rav Nachman le Rav Huna. So Rav Nachman comes to Rav Huna and says, hey, something doesn't jive with this braita. It says, Hashochet chatat b'shabbat b'chutz lavodah zara chayav shalosh chataot. Okay, if somebody slaughters a chatat, a sin offering. Now, what's a sin offering? Do I own a sin offering? Well, a sin offering gets, what happens to a sin offering? We slaughter it. Then the meat goes to the Kohen, okay? And the rest of it gets burned on the altar, right? Some parts get burned on the altar, the rest goes to the Kohen. So it's not really mine, okay? As opposed to, let's say, a shlamim, where the meat of the shlamim ultimately belongs to me, because what are we going to do? We're going to burn some of the parts on the altar, and the rest of it I'm going to eat. So they specifically take a case of a chatat and not a shlamim, because we're going to see why, okay? If it was a shlamim, and basically we're going to say it's because the chatat, it's a case where I'm doing something to something that doesn't belong to me. Who does it belong to? The temple, right? And maybe the Kohen. Okay, but it doesn't belong to me. It's temple property, even though it's my sacrifice. So we'll come back to that idea. Is it really not mine? Okay, but right now we assume a chatat, it's specifically a chatat. Now what's the case? We want to say that there's a case where I could be liable 3 sin offerings. Don't get confused. I'm bringing a sin offering, and that's going to cause me to do something wrong in 3 ways. I'm now going to have to bring 3 new sin offerings because of that. So what is it? When do you have to bring a sin offering? If you do something that, if intentionally you did it, you'd be liable karet. But you did it unintentionally, so you have to bring a chatat. And there's many times, right, if we go back to Masechet Shabbat, where you can do one action, but it was 2 malachas, and then you have 2 different chatats you have to bring, because in one action you did 2 different things wrong, and then you bring, right, obviously karet you can't get times 3, but, right, it's like getting multiple life sentences, okay, but, right, where you can do that in our life, that's because life sentences get canceled, but you don't get multiple karets, but you can incur a chatat multiple times. You have to bring many chatats. So what happened in this action? You were shochet a chatat. You took a sin offering. You slaughtered it b'Shabbat. Okay, so you can't slaughter an animal on Shabbat. Not a sin offering, right? If it's a sacrifice like the Korban Tamid, you can. That's overridden by Shabbat. It's overrides Shabbat, but not a sin offering. Bring it a different day of the week. You did that on Shabbat, malacha of Shabbat. You're chayav chatat, right? Obviously, again, it's all unwitting. You didn't realize it was Shabbat. You didn't realize all these things. Bachutz, you did it outside the temple, okay, without realizing that you can't slaughter a korban outside the temple, right? This is, again, an animal you designated for the sin offering. You took it, you slaughtered it on Shabbat outside the temple. That's called shechita chutz. You're not allowed to do that. And le'avodah zarah, when you slaughtered it, you said, I'm doing this for the sake of idol worship. So, third problem, you now worshipped idols because you slaughtered for avodah zarah. So you have to bring 3 chataot. Okay, what does this have to do with anything? Well, if you say that as soon as I slaughter one siman of this animal, I've already forbidden it for benefit. So I took a sin offering. It wasn't mine, okay? But I did an act, a small act, only one siman. I basically turned it into an item that's now forbidden for benefit. And at that point, shechita chutz, now when I continue and finish the slaughter, and now I'm going to be chayav, when am I chayav shechita chutz? When I finish the shechita. Well, when I finish the shechita, I shouldn't be chayav shechita chutz anymore. Why not? Because when I got through the first siman, mechatech ba'afarhu, I already turned it to dust, basically. This is like nothing. Okay? Why is it nothing? Because once we have an item that turns into an item that was worshipped for idol worship, which was done according to Rav Huna, if I take something that's not mine, this sin offering, I slaughter one siman, I do a small act, I just slaughter one siman, I now turn this animal, it's no longer a chatat, it's no longer a korban, it's an item that's forbidden for benefit. If I then continue and finish the slaughter and slaughter it outside the temple, well, it's not a korban anymore. I've ruined the korban. At that point, it's not kodshim. So I shouldn't be chayav shechita chutz. Because according to Rav Huna, in the middle of that process, it already became forbidden for benefit. Once it's forbidden for benefit, it's not a korban anymore. Okay, the name kodshim kind of left it. So why would I be chayav? Okay, the Rashi calls it like afar ba'alma. It's like we talk about when you do bitul chametz, right? We can, maybe bitul chametz is a great example. Like, what does it mean it's nothing? It's there, it's an animal, right? But just like we say, whatever chametz I have is null and void and it's nothing, right? It's the same thing here. As soon as it's forbidden to benefit from, it becomes nothing because it's something that's supposed to be, first of all, if you remember, idols you're supposed to destroy. So it's like something that's supposed to be destroyed. It's definitely not kodshim anymore. So shechita chutz, I'm only liable if I took a korban and sacrificed it outside. This isn't a korban anymore. So we're going to have 2 answers. Both, one is going to be Amar Rav Papa, the next one's going to be somebody else said in the name of Rav Papa. Okay, we're at the very top of Amud Bet. Amar Rav Papa, Hacha bechatat ha'of askinan, dekulu bahade hadade ka'ate. We must be talking about a bird sin offering. What's the story with a bird sin offering? Remember, you do malika. Okay, now in this case you did shechita, but you did it outside the temple. That you're chayav shechita chutz when you actually do shechita outside the temple. You might remember we had a sugi about that, but not important. But in a chatat ha'of, you only need to slaughter one siman. So now it's perfect because when you slaughter that one siman, everything happens at the same time. That's kulu bahade adade ka'ate. Everything happens at the same time. I slaughter the animal, chayav for Shabbat. I slaughtered the animal and did a small act, and that small act meant that this is now an item that, first of all, I worshipped idols, and it's an item now. Now, when I turn it into an item that is now forbidden to benefit, well, it's at that moment I've already done the shechita chutz, so it's not a problem, like we said before. Before, it was a timeline. First, it became forbidden to benefit. Then, we did the shechita chutz, which can't happen. We have to have them all happen at the same time. Well, here, since you did the siman echad, it all happened at the same time. Since that was the end game for the chatat ha'of. But that's not going to work so well because Michte Rav Huna keman amr l'shmate ke'ula. Now remember, Rav Huna said kevan shechapa siman echad asara. Okay, one siman, which is exactly what we're talking about. But he said it. The Gemara said what he says is like what Ulla said, and Ulla said Asaba ma'aseh asara. As soon as you do one act, right? If I bow down to my friend's idol, nothing happens. But if I do an action to it, then it's forbidden. I can forbid someone else's item. And the assumption was that when he said siman echad and he said it like Ulla, what we mean is any little action. It doesn't have to be a siman, 50% of the shechita. It could be cutting a little bit, starting the shechita. As soon as I do any action to this animal, it already becomes mine to the extent that I can forbid it. So if that's the case, then our timeline is going to be all messed up. Because again, as long as we have it's forbidden for benefit happens before shechutei chutz, we're going to be in trouble. So since Rav Huna, we says it like Ulla, ve'Ulla maaseh kol dehu kama. And Ulla said any little action. So that means, where are we on the timeline? When does it become forbidden to benefit? Before I'm liable for shechutei chutz. Shechutei chutz happens when I cut the majority of one siman. But the prohibition, the fact that I now make this forbidden to benefit, happens when? As soon as I begin the slaughter, because I do one little action that already makes it forbidden for benefit. And then by the time I get to shechutei chutz, it's no longer a korban, right? By the time I finish the shechita. So within this answer of Rav Papa that we're talking about chat ha'of, they come up with a different explanation. Ela, or another, I would say like this, another ukimta, okay? First we said, it's not just a chatat, it's a chatat of a bird, which would be the one siman. And in addition, you have to add one more thing. Ela be'omer b'gemar zivchei hu ovda. The person who was slaughtering it said, it's going to be for idol worship when I finish the shechita. And then it's only going to be at the end when I finish the first siman. Okay? And that resolves the problem. So now we have an answer to the difficulty, which is, it's a chatat ha'of. I said it's going to only become an object, right? It's only going to be for the idol when I finish the slaughtering. So as I finish the first siman, everything happens at the same time. I'm liable for Shabbat. I'm liable for shechutei chutz because it was still an animal at that point. It was still a korban at that point. It was still a sacrifice. I hadn't yet forbidden it for benefit. And I did, for avodah zarah, I did an act of idol worship because I did it, as I said, I'm slaughtering it at the end of my slaughtering. Now, the problem with this is, and we're going to reject this answer right now, because ihachi ma'irya chatat lishmeinan zevach. Why did it specifically use it off in a case of a chatat? What did we say? Because in a chatat, what's the issue? The issue is, it doesn't belong to me. That's why we distinguish between a chatat and a shlamim. And all along we've been saying there's a chatat, because this whole thing is highlighting an issue where I'm forbidding something that's not mine. It takes more to do that than if it were my own, right? But, right, if it were my own, as soon as I start slaughtering it, for sure it would be a problem. But now let's push shlamim into that picture. Let's say we take a shlamim, which is owned by me. It's my own, which means much more easily I can turn it into an item of idol worship because it's my own. Now, normally what would happen with the shlamim, the second I start the slaughter, right, even forget Rav Huna, right, Rav Huna's talking about someone else, but as soon as I start slaughtering it, it's going to be forbidden, and then it won't be shechutei chutz, right? But what if, in this case, we just said, I said only at the end of the sacrifice is it going to become avodah zarah, right? I'm slaughtering it, l'shem, right? What do you say? Bigmar zivchei hu ovda. I'm only going to be worshiping this once I'm done with the slaughtering. Well, then it doesn't matter if it's my own, if it's someone else's. It could have easily brought a case of a shlamim, because if I push off that moment to a later point, because I said it in words, it doesn't matter if it's mine, it doesn't matter if it's someone else's, and then why did they specifically use an example of a chatat? So that doesn't make any sense. So once we do this ukimta to resolve the difficulty against Rav Huna, it actually raises a different problem, which is then the braita should have just said any sacrifice. And it didn't, and that's a problem. Okay, so Ela Amar Marzutra Mishmei de Rav Papa, Hacha b'mayas kinan, Kigon shayach chatzi kane pagum, okay, now what's this? Remember, a chatzi kane pagum, if half the windpipe is cut. Okay, we're talking about a bird where it's only one siman, and half the windpipe is cut. Vosif alav kolshehu u'gemaro. And what do you have to do to slaughter it? All you need to do is one little teeny action. Now it's perfect. Because why? Dekulu b'hadeh deka'atya, and then everything happens at the exact same moment. What was our problem before? If you said chatat of a bird, you would need, right, you would just do a little bit, and you already have the issue of the avodah zarah, and you don't yet have the issue of the shechita chutz. But we said, right, that's a problem because, right, that doesn't work. So we had to say, oh, you said only bigmar shechita. But if you have it all happen at the same time, which is your windpipe is already half cut, all you have to do is one little action. With that one little action, you, number one, turned it into forbidden to benefit, but you also finished the shechita in that one action. So then you be chayav shechita chutz as well, because it's only forbidden for brahana after you already did the act of shechita chutz, of offering it outside. So that's a good answer. Now comes Rav Papa, and he makes 2 points. Okay, and then the Gemara is going to say, okay, your points are kind of obvious. What's your point of making these 2 points? So Amar Rav Papa, Ilav da Amar Rav Huna siman echad, lo havya chatat tiyuvte. My maaseh rabba. Okay, this is all theoretical because it's not what Rav Huna said. But if Rav Huna hadn't said siman echad, okay, let's go back to Rav Huna. What did Rav Huna say? If your behemah of your friend is crouched down before the idol, kevan sheshachapa siman echad, as soon as you do just one siman, meaning half an action, which then we understood to mean any teeny bit of action, you forbid it. Now, if he hadn't said one siman and he had just said action, once you do something to it, what would we have assumed? Maybe you have to shech the whole thing, right? Our general assumption would be, if I take something that's not mine, to turn it into my own that I can forbid it, we would assume it requires more action than that, right? A complete action. So if Rav Huna hadn't said one siman, we would have assumed he meant complete the slaughter. And only when you complete the slaughter are you able to forbid your friend's animal. That's what we would have thought. And then the chata wouldn't have been a tiyuvte. In other words, what does he say? The whole question you asked against me and said, this case of the chatat, it could have been a different animal. It could have been, a shlamim, for example. That wouldn't have been a difficulty because we would have said, no, it's not a shlamim because a shlamim would be any act. And this requires the completion of shechita. And that's why then it would have worked very well with the braita. Because you would have said, the braita is talking about a sin offering. You have a sin offering. It's not yours. Only when you complete the shechita, right? Then shlamim would obviously be from the moment you start the slaughter, it's already forbidden to benefit, and then there's no shechita chutz because you've already called, it's not a sacrifice anymore, it's now an item that's forbidden b'hana'ah. And then we wouldn't have had this question, why specifically a chatat? Because we know, a chatat only at the end, okay? The chatat would only be after you couple simanim, and at that point you've violated shechita chutz. Okay, that's number one, which again, it's pretty, like if you understood the sugya, then that would be an obvious point. And va'amar Rav Papa, ilav da'amar Rav Huna behemat chavero, lo havi chatat tiyuvte. Now, if Rav Papa hadn't said your friends, right now, let's assume it's like playing bingo where you change, take out one letter, and so take out one, let's leave in siman echad. And let's say, what if he changed, instead of saying behemat chavero, he said your own behemah. Your own behemah, when is slaughtering it going to turn it into something that's forbidden for benefit? When you slaughter one siman, meaning when you don't complete the action, already at the beginning stage. And again, we said in the end it was like even a small act. A small act would be for your own sake. And then, again, lo have chatat tiyuvte. We wouldn't ask that question about why is this specifically a chatat. It would be obvious. Meitim, what would be the reason? Didei matze asal, dechavre lo matze asal. We would have said, Rav Huna, this isn't a problem. The chatat, you can't just forbid because it's not your own. A shlamim, that's your own, you forbid as soon as you start slaughtering. And then that's why the braita didn't talk about a shlamim, because a shlamim, there'd be no shechita chutz, because as soon as you start, it's already forbidden. The chatat would make perfect sense. The chatat only at the end, and, right, then shechita chutz would kick in. So now, or maybe you can't even forbid it at all, okay, and then it's never forbidden. Okay, if it's never forbidden, then that's perfect, right? Because what happens? Well, you still worshipped idols, even though it doesn't become forbidden to benefit. So you did a slaughtering that was worshipping an idol. You did a shechita chutz because it was still a korban the whole time. Even at the end, it could still be considered a korban because your action did nothing to it, right? And you're obviously chayav for Shabbat. So that would have also worked fine. So if we change one point of Rav Huna, or we change a different point of Rav Huna, there wouldn't have been any difficulty. So the Gemara says, Pshita, okay, this is pretty obvious. What are you trying to tell us? Now they have a very interesting line. until now I said a chatat doesn't belong to you, right? It belongs to the temple, really, because in the end the meat's going to go to the Kohen, the other part's going to be burned on the altar, as opposed to a shlamim, which really belongs to you, because in the end the meat's going to be yours. But now the Gemara says, well, ma'u detema, you might have thought, and this is what Rav Huna is pointing out is not the case, you might have thought, kevan de kanyale, because look, in the end, I bought this animal to bring as a korban chatat, right? I had to purchase it, or it was my own animal, right? That I took and said, I'm designating this for a korban. So it was my animal in the beginning. And therefore, and the kanyale kapara, I bought it for my own atonement. This sacrifice is mine, because it's for my atonement. You might have thought, kedide damya, maybe it's like my own. It's not like me going into your house and taking your item and worshiping it, right? In the end, or slaughtering it for worship, it's my own animal. I'm using it for my atonement. Maybe it belongs to me. Kamash malan. Therefore, Rav Huna is coming to teach you, no, this chatat is not your own. And that's why he's comparing it completely, right, to Rav Papa saying, if Rav Huna hadn't said this, right, would have, because a chatat he's trying to point out, which we understood in the beginning, but just don't be confused about this, but a chatat is not your own, okay? Or, interesting, you could say, what's kamash malan? It is your own, but not for this sake, okay? Not for the sake of this. You don't have the ability to turn it into right. And this opens a fascinating question, which we're not going to deal with today, but it's something to think about from this stuff. Is a chatat owned by you or not? Like, what's the nature of a korban chatat? Is it belonging to the owner, or is it completely not yours, or is it partially yours, right? Maybe yours for the sake that this is yours for atonement, but the ramifications for avodah zarah would be, but you don't turn it into but your ability to turn it into an item worship for avodah zarah would only be treated as if it belongs to someone else, right? So there's two different ways of viewing this. Either it's not your own at all, it's not owned by you in any way, shape, or form, or maybe it is owned by you, but not for the sake that you could turn it into avodah zarah. For that element, we're going to treat it like someone else's property. Okay, so that was just a point about Rav Papa at the end there. Now we're going to go to, there's a na'at, siman. Na'at is for Nachman, Amram, and Yitzchak. Okay, the next three rabbis we're going to see, Rav Nachman, Rav Amram, Rav Yitzchak Amre, they're going to completely disagree with Rav Huna. Ein adam oser davar she'eno shelo. Okay, you cannot forbid something that's someone else's. Okay, now, here the question is, Rashi says, let's look at Rashi for a minute, toward the bottom, afilu bigmar ma'aseh. Rashi says, even if you completely slaughter the animal. He disagrees with Rav Huna completely. Rav Huna says, a little item, you slaughter it, you start the slaughter, it already becomes a chata, right? It already becomes forbidden to benefit, avodah zarah. On the other extreme, we have never. You can't ever forbid this chatat or any item that belongs to anybody else. Okay? It will never become avodah zarah, even if you completely do a whole renovation, a whole whatever you do to it. It doesn't matter. Some people say, okay, and that's what Rashi quotes them, and this is like the Ramban, the Rosh, and the name of the Rabbeinu Hananel, say, I'll just keep reading in Rashi because we have it in front of us, Item afarshe b'maseh kol dehu. Some people say he just disagrees with Rav Huna's point that with a little action. He says, if you completely slaughter it, these three rabbis will say, then you'll forbid it. But you need to completely finish the action. Like you need a serious action, not a minor action. So there's a difference of opinion here about what these three rabbis say. Do they think you can never take anyone else's, or do they think you just need something much more of a concrete action, like a complete renovation, a complete change to what it is, right? Imagine an animal. You slaughter it, it's now meat. It's not an animal anymore, right? This is like why people aren't vegetarians necessarily, right? People who are vegetarians are like, oh, it's an animal, right? They look at a meat and they say, this is an animal. Everyone else just kind of ignores that fact because it's meat. It's not really an animal. It's something completely different. So when you completely change the item, that's enough, right? Remember, you're kona b'shinoi maaseh, right? You do a change, you do an action. This goes back to all sorts of sugya we've seen. So there's a bit of a debate whether they think at that point yes or they think never. So now the Gemara is going to bring this same braita has a difficulty on them in a kind of funny way, because what they're going to say is, what do you mean? We have this braita, and we already explained that it's chatara of, and which we already explained it fit with Rav Huna. And then and the assumption seems to be usually we don't do this kind of thing, because usually we'll say, oh, that was just an answer to Rav Huna. But what they're going to do here is say, well, it seems that everyone kind of in the end understood that that's really the way to read it, which is going to create a problem for these three rabbis. So let's read it inside, and we'll end here with the difficulty. Meitive. Hashochet chata b'shabbat b'chutz l'avodah zarah chayav shalosh chataot. Ve'ukimnan, and it was explained that this braita is talking about bechatat ha'of ubechatzi kaneh pagum. Now they explained it the way Mar Zutra said in the name of Rav Papa. It's in the sin offering of a bird with the chatzi kaneh pagum, and all you need to do is that little action, and right, that only after that will it become forbidden to benefit. Now, the main point being Tama de chatat ha'ofu. Right? The whole reason to explain it that way is it will only work in a chatat ha'of where everything happens at the same time. Aval zevach lo. But if it's an animal, it won't work. Because what's going to happen with the animal? As soon as you slaughter one siman, it already becomes forbidden to benefit, and then there's no shechita because it's not a korban anymore. I'm just continuing to drop into the next daf so we finish the sentence, and it's a short daf anyway. V'ein adam oser davar she'eno shelo, and if you say you can't forbid someone else's item, you could have just said here chatat be'ema as well. It would have worked. So why did they establish this case in a chatat ha'of and in a case where it was chatzi kaneh pagum, when seems like you could have just done chatat be'ema, it wouldn't have turned into something forbidden till either ever or till you finish the slaughter. And then again, remember, there's. I just want to clarify one thing. No matter what, if you slaughter that animal completely, right, you're going to be chayav Shabbat because you did shechita. You're going to be chayav shechut because you did it outside and it had it become forbidden to benefit. And you worshipped avodah zarah. Remember, that's not connected to whether it's forbidden for hana'ah or not. Even if I can't take something of yours, I still did an action of slaughtering an animal for avodah zarah, so I'm liable for that. Okay, so I'll definitely get karet for that. In which case, I should get those 3 chataot. So it could have been a behema also. So that's the difficulty on Rav Nachman and Rav Amram and Rav Yitzchak, and we'll get back to this in tomorrow's daf. So what we did today is we started with this. The first part was taking the Mishna and comparing it to the Tosefta and saying if you slaughter an animal for the sake of the water, for some item that's attached to the ground, water, mountain, all those things, desert, your shechita is disqualified, but it's not forbidden to benefit from, whereas the Tosefta said it is. So we explained the Tosefta as being, you did it to some guardian of the mountain, not the mountain itself, and that was further proven from the language that in that list in the Tosefta, which didn't come up in our Mishnah, was to Michael the Sar HaGadol, which is some, angel. Then we got to the statement of Rav Huna, and if we summarize our daf from a glance, we have Rav Huna versus Rav Nachman, Rav Amram, Rav Yitzchak about this approach. Can I forbid someone else's item by doing, no one thinks by worshiping it, like bowing to it, but if I do an action, and then the question is it right, a teeny action, some minor thing, which, we have Rav Huna say 1 siman, but then based on Ulla, we said even less than that would be enough, versus Rav Nachman, Rav Yitzchak, and Rav Amram, who say either no action at all or a complete action. Okay? And then we basically brought the same source first as a problem against Rav Nachman, against Rav Huna. By the way, notice, I just realized this right now. Rav Nachman's the one who asked the question on Rav Huna, and he's the one who has, obviously, the other opinion. Right? Not obviously, but it happens to be here. It kind of works well, which is he disagrees with Rav Huna, raises this as a difficulty, and then he himself says, I hold with a different position than Rav Huna. And anyway, we brought this braita. We had 2 attempts to resolve it. In the end, we took the second approach, which was someone else. The first one was Rav Papa. The second was someone else in the name, Mar Zutra, in the name of Rav Papa. That in the end, it must be a chatat ha'of. With chatzi kaneh pagum, you did a teeny action, but that happened at the same time you also finished the shechita. And that's why it could be shechut, and we resolved it. Then Rav Papa had these 2 points he made. They said, what's your chiddush? And your chiddush is, well, he wanted to tell us, don't think that a chatat belongs to the owner. It doesn't. Okay? Even though I am the owner of the korban, I'm not really the owner of the korban because in the end, no part of it is going to go to me. And therefore, for this purpose, it's not my own to be able to forbid, right? Unless, again, in the end, if I do an action to it, yes. But without the action, I can't forbid it. And then we have Rav Nachman and Rav Amram and Rav Yitzchak who say the opposite. And then we bring the braita the way we explained it according to Rav Huna and said that raises a difficulty against them. And we'll come back to this and figure out how to deal with it in tomorrow's daf. With that, wishing everyone a good day.